There's probably going to be some bad language in this, so you might not want to let the kids watch. Hey everyone, I'm Dom. I'm a bit of a wino and I love to rant, so hopefully you come along with me. Now, today I'm going to be talking about why I think Valentina Shevchenko, the Bullet, is the number one female pound for pound fighter in the world. Now, I understand why Amanda is currently ranked number one pound for pound. She's the GOAT. There's no denying that. The resume, she's beat the other greatest female fighters in the world, including Valentina twice. I have a little bit of a different opinion on that second fight, but we'll get into that later. But, beating home, who Valentina also beat, but Rousey, Tate, Cyborg, defending her title so many times, you can understand why she's the GOAT. And I also understand that there's the argument that she's pound for pound best because she's a two-division champ. But let's be honest here. Featherweight is pretty much a non-existent division. It was created because Cyborg was such a big name. They had needed somewhere to put her, and for so long she was the only woman in that division. They'd bring up 135ers to challenge her. And the 135ers they brought up weren't the best. Before she actually went 145, I believe she had a couple of fights at 140 against Leslie Smith and Lena Landsberg. Smith's not even in the UFC anymore. Look, she's tough, but she's definitely not the best. Lena Landsberg's looking better now, but she's still not at the top of the bantamweight division. And Cyborg is considerably bigger than both of them. And then you had Tonya Evinger, and Yana Kunitskaya. Kunitskaya, look, they were both good at the time. Kunitskaya was probably around a middling bantamweight at the time. She's steadily got better, and now she's in the top 5. But at the time she fought Cyborg, she just wasn't there. Holly Holm was the only, really great fighter that Cyborg fought in the UFC at featherweight before she got Amanda. And since Amanda knocked Cyborg out and has been the champion, there hasn't been much of a division around it either. I love Megan Anderson. I'm a huge fan, but she's still very raw, and it's hard for her because she doesn't have, a division to build up in. Felicia Spencer, I'd say, is a little bit above Megan, mainly because of her grappling game. But once again, iron sharpens iron. You just can't develop into one of the true greats if you're in a division where there are no other contenders. And then you look at Valentina. She had a career in the bantamweight division before they opened the flyweights, and she easily makes flyweight. It's her natural division. So she was definitely an undersized bantamweight. And she beat everyone that they put her up against except for Amanda Nunes in that division, including Holly Holm, one of the greats, and Juliana Pena, also a very solid bantamweight fighter. Looking at that, pound for pound, that's the whole idea of what pound for pound's about. She's smaller and she's still competing against the bigger ladies. And you especially see that when you break down her fights against Amanda, especially the most recent one, the second fight, which I and a lot of other people believe she won. So it was a super close fight. I'm not denying that by any stretch. It was not a robbery. People throw robbery around too often. The way judging criteria is written, it's open for interpretation. It's also very hard to tell what's happening live. So there are close fights where you think one person's won, but if the other person gets the win, you can understand it. And the second fight between Amanda and Valentina was certainly one of those. However, you cannot deny that it was super close, and there is a very good argument for Valentina winning that fight. Then when you factor in the size difference between them, that's the whole idea of pound for pound. Valentina was significantly smaller than Amanda Nunes, and it was a hair splitting them in that fight. Since that fight, they've both been completely dominant in their respective divisions. Now, Valentina's isn't quite as established as the bantamweight division, but it's starting to build. And you could say a lot of the women that came to that division were women who weren't necessarily at the top of the other divisions. But the thing is, maybe this is their natural division. Like, weight classes matter. You can see that when someone who's struggling at a certain weight class moves and suddenly they're great. I've just done a video about Robert Whittaker, and he was good at welterweight. Who knows how far he could have gone, but he's a million times better at middleweight. So the fact that these other women are at flyweight now and performing better, maybe that's just their natural weight as well. And let's be honest, Valentina's been completely dominating that division. No one's come close to her. Like, Jermaine Durand, largely got dominated by Amanda, but Amanda had to just sit on her wrestling in that fight, because when they were standing, Jermaine was doing very well against her. Even took a round. I think it was the fourth, but it's been a long time since I watched that. So I think the biggest factor about who should be number one pound for pound, because since that last fight, they've both been so dominant and it's so hard to find flaws in either one of them, you've just got to go back to that last fight. And I rewatched it before making this video, and I'm telling you, once again, I thought Valentina was the rightful winner of that fight. Now, I made a few notes. The first round I gave to Amanda. It was mostly a feeling out round, but Amanda just had more activity, especially on the leg kicks. She was kind of working the outside and inside of Valentina's lead leg, whereas Valentina was also landing quite a few leg kicks, but just to the outside. And Amanda was landing more leg kicks. She also landed a few body kicks and probably more punches than Valentina. Neither of them landed many punches in that round. It was, as I said, pretty much a feeling out round. Not a lot happened, but just on the activity, Amanda won that one. And then in between rounds, you noticed Valentina had something wrong with her finger, as it got told later in the fight. It indeed was a dislocation. So good on Valentina for sticking in there and still, being so competitive that round with a dislocated finger. But also, even if Amanda didn't mean it, it was caused by her punching the tip of Valentina's finger. And you've got to count that as damage. So that dislocation, I think, makes it even more of a case that Amanda won that round, even though I thought she won it already. Now, the second round was super close. It's about as close as a round can get. So I understand it going either way. And probably, would have had to go to Amanda on two of those judges' scorecards because, as we'll talk later on, I cannot possibly see Amanda being given the third or fourth. But I gave it to Valentina mostly on the first half of that round. She was just doing more. I also took some notes about this one. She was stepping up her leg kick game, and she was also landing more punches than Amanda in the first half of that round. Throughout the second half of that round, Valentina kind of stopped doing much at all. Mainly, because she had her trap set and she was waiting for Amanda to come in, and Amanda wasn't really playing into that. But Amanda was being a little more active throughout the second half of that round. Not as much as Valentina had been at the start of the round, but I felt like she was kind of inching her way back into possibly winning that round. And but then right at the end, Valentina landed, I believe it was a good 3-punch combination, which in my mind sealed it for Valentina. If that hadn't happened, I would have found it almost impossible to split that round because it was so close. But that was one, I think, the most significant thing in that round. And two, when you add it to what she'd done earlier in the round, to me, gave her that round. So then we go into the third round. And this is when Valentina's counters really started paying off. She's landing with a lot more power. And you're seeing a similar story happen over and over again. And that's her kind of bait Nunes in, wait for Nunes to throw a big power right, slip it, and then answer with 2 or 3, usually a 3-punch combination. And she was landing that fairly well. Amanda kept going with the leg kicks, but I believe it's pretty obvious that Valentina, with those counters, with the more significant strikes, won that round fairly easily. Now, it was interesting in between these rounds because you saw Valentina's corner for a bit, and then the director took it over to Amanda's corner, and she had this big, cheesy grin on her face. But I saw it as kind of like a fake smile, and then she's kind of like going, "Oh, come on, let's go." And, you know, if you're winning a round and you've just had a really good round, a lot of people will do that to kind of psych out their opponent. But to me, that felt like Amanda was psyching herself up because she was starting to feel the frustration. She definitely fooled John Anik because when they came out into the fourth round, Anik's there going like, "Oh, she's still got so much energy." Oh, because cardio was a question going in. And he believed all that yelling and whatnot was her being, you know, excited and motivated and going on. But I think it was pretty clear, especially as the round went on, that was more of a frustration thing. Now, the fourth round started really well. They both had good moments. There were, you know, they probably had about 3 sequences each where they won the sequence, and it was a pretty good sequence. And then Valentina got a 4th sequence with a big knee right at about the halfway point of the round. And I thought that meant she was winning it up to that point because she'd done the bigger things. Amanda was still going with the leg kicks and doing things in the middle of those big sequences, but when you look at the way the judging criteria is written, it's the more impactful strikes and grappling that you're supposed to weigh above the cumulative effect. So I think Valentina just had one extra big moment in that first half of the round and definitely edged it to her at that point. And then as the round wore on, she took it over even more. Like her counters were just going off. And the biggest thing was it was usually 1 strike from Amanda to multiple strikes coming back from Val. Even the leg kicks and whatnot, Amanda would seem to throw 1 at a time. Whereas Valentina would quite often use a leg kick at the end of a combination, for example. And as with the third round, the biggest thing, it was the trap throughout most of the fight. Amanda would come in with the big right, Valentina would slip it and answer with multiple shots. And even as that round went on, Joe mentioned that he thought Amanda was getting frustrated. So finally, the kind of fake bravado that I'd seen, it seemed like the commentators were noticing as well. Just a side note, it had been happening throughout the fight so far, but as they went into their corners for that 4th round, the crowd's booing, and stupid fucking crowd, man. Like, it pisses me off when that happens. Like, they were booing because they thought it wasn't an exciting fight, but it was an amazing fight. Like, it was a technical battle between the 2 best in the world. Like, they can't just go in there and throw haymakers. Amanda can't do it because when she tried to, like, the 4th round was the most aggressive she'd been. It was the most she got landed on because Valentina was setting up those counters so well. And she is so good at counter striking. She is so quick. She's so great at movement too because she stays largely flat-footed and just in one position. But, you know, is ready to move out of the way when you come in. She's not necessarily bobbing, weaving, bouncing all that much. She's just standing there waiting for you to come. She'll slip, she'll throw a few, and it just shows her management of distance and timing. It's really a sight to behold. But yeah, Amanda can't just rush in on her, because when she did, it's when she was getting hit the most. And Valentina clearly couldn't do that to Amanda, because that's going to get you hit. And Amanda's got some of the best power in all of women's MMA. So the other thing is, on my card, Valentina was winning doing what she's doing against, even at that point, was probably the GOAT of female MMA. So going into the fifth, I had it 3-1 Valentina. First to Amanda, second, third, fourth to Valentina. Although that second was so close, it could have easily been 2-2. Now, going into the fifth was a really interesting round, because it's all about how you interpret the scoring criteria. Now, Valentina landed a good little flurry right at the start of that round, but besides that, there wasn't much striking going on. It was pretty much Amanda trying to take Valentina down for most of the round, and Valentina defending the takedown, which she did for most of it. So I would say in that situation where there's one person trying to take the other down and the other defending it, that's basically a stalemate. If the striking had been equal, you'd call the grappling equal, and then you'd look towards aggression and octagon control. And in that case, the person going for the takedown, they're the one with the aggression and octagon control, so you'd edge it to them. But since Valentina had landed a few and Amanda hadn't, up until a certain point that I'm about to get in, even though Amanda is going for the takedown the whole time, the fact that Valentina's defending it and she'd landed those strikes, meant to me that Valentina was winning the round. Now, a big mistake Valentina made, little past halfway through, I think it was going for a head and arm throw, which is never a wise thing to do, because exactly what happened to her is what can quite often happen in MMA, and that's she got her back taken. But Amanda did literally nothing with it. Like, Valentina had wrist control on both her hands, and they just kind of sat there for, I don't know, about 30 seconds or so until Valentina got back up. So I don't think you can score that basically at all. And then they went straight back into Valentina going for the takedown. Not Valentina, Amanda. Valentina defended it for quite a while, but then Amanda did get it. And it was a decent takedown too. There was a bit of impact to it. Valentina came down hard. But then once she was down, Amanda pretty much just laid in guard, and Valentina landed some decent strikes from the bottom, elbows and punches. So this is where you really got to look into the judging criteria, because the letter of the law is you judge strikes and grappling, and you judge them both by immediate impact having higher scoring than cumulative impact. But then in interpretation, it's like, well, what do you mean by immediate impact? The immediate impact of Valentina's strikes at the start of the round were decent. The immediate impact of the takedown, like, as I said, it had some good force to it. But besides that, could you also just, interpret immediate impact as by getting taken down, it's having the immediate impact of stopping the person you took down being able to use their strikes, being able to implement their game. Because if so, that's a pretty decent immediate impact right there, even though it causes no damage necessarily. So yeah, it's just how you read it. Going off the scoring criteria, I think the strikes at the start of the round and Valentina's strikes off her back probably had more immediate impact than Amanda's, definitely than her back take, because that had no impact at all, and probably more than her takedown and her time in top, because like I said, after the takedown, she just laid in guard. So once again, that's a very hard round to score. I imagine a lot of judges would have given it to Amanda because it does look good getting a takedown right at the end of the round. And she did neutralize Valentina's offense for most of the round by going for the takedown. But it's all about how you read the criteria. And on that criteria, like I found it almost impossible to choose, but I think it had to go to Valentina. That being said, so my score at the end was 4-1 Valentina. Amanda getting the first and Valentina getting the rest. But I completely acknowledge that the second and fifth easily could have gone to Amanda as well. So that's why when the decision was read out, I wasn't shocked. I wasn't angry. I mean, the first time I watched it, I wasn't even scoring. I was just enjoying the fight. And when it went to the cards, I had no idea which way it'd go. This was the fourth time I watched it. The second and third, I don't remember how I scored it. I just remember I thought Valentina won each of those. And this time's the most I've actually paid attention to it and paid attention to the judging criteria. And I still believe Valentina won. 3-2 definitely, maybe even 4-1. So, yeah, the fact that I think she won that fight, and also the fact that it was so close, and you can have arguments either way when the size difference is so significant, and it was, because looking at them together in the cage, Amanda was significantly bigger, and that's what pound for pound's all about. So with that into consideration, personally, I think you've got to say that Valentina is number one pound for pound. Now, if she beats Andrade this coming Sunday here in Australia, Saturday in America, I would love to see the rematch. I would love to see the trilogy. And then maybe we could get a definitive answer for who truly is the number one pound for pound woman in the world. Well, on the wino, hope you've enjoyed my rant. Cheers.